Those years were of decisive importance in shaping his cinematic vision. But what were they really like? His scanty personal correspondence is of no help at all in answering that question. On the other hand, his assertions about a number of matters in his autobiographical writings and in confessional talks with friends proved to be quite illuminating. It is no less true, however, that blurrings of the truth and outright falsehoods mark a lot of the recollections that he chose to share with the public, some of which newspaper reporters, film magazine writers, biofilm producers, and previous biographers have been especially fond of repeating and amplifying. Not until I had penetrated the layers of obfuscation and prevarication was I at last able to appreciate how profoundly autobiographical a filmmaker Chaplin was. Through what he chose to reveal directly about his past and what to transpose or conceal, he charged his pictures with enormous emotional energy. In striking through the encrustations of myth, I was aided by late Victorian record keepers and data gatherers whose findings made it possible to judge the accuracy of Chaplin's descriptions of his early years. Because of the schooling that the music halls he was familiar with offered to Chaplin's raw talent, the stunning variety of their entertainments also received attention here, along with the particular contributions of Dan Leno, Fred Karno, and other legendary figures. And no understanding of the provenance of Chaplin's art would be complete without mention of the movie comedies Max Linder made in France before World War I, or of the techniques of cinematic storytelling developed by D.W. Griffith, or of the sex and violence sense of humor of the slapstick king Mack Sennett, who became the mentor Chaplin learned from, and learned to resist. Figuring in my story, too, is the emergence of Southern California as the center of the movie industry, as well as the careers of such early stars as Mabel Normand, Fatty Arbuckle, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford. The cultural puzzle of why the young Chaplin received such a terrific boost in his box office appeal once he assumed the identity of a tramp inspired me to explore the rather complicated attitudes toward tramps that Americans held at the time. And my further attempts to explain his fantastically quick rise to fame include a discussion of the sexual identity joking in the early comedies against a backdrop of the huge success of female impersonation vaudeville in the second decade of the 20th century, and the destabilization of traditional relations between the sexes in advanced societies that Walter Lippmann, for one, took note of in Drift and Mastery, 1914. Also essential to an understanding of Chaplin's art were the repeated efforts of reformers to place moral controls on the industry, culminating in the formation of the Legion of Decency in the early 1930s and the establishment of the Breen Office. A good many of the famous people who appear in these pages had highly contradictory personalities, Adolf Hitler and Franklin D. Roosevelt being but two examples. Even so, the radical disjunctions in Chaplin's life and career stand out as remarkable. The charmer who beguiled the glitterati of Movieland, the intellectuals of Greenwich Village, and the hostesses of Mayfair, versus the loner who grew bored with company after an hour or so and often shunned it completely. The son who was haunted by memories of his mother's madness and deeply feared that her fate foretold his own, versus the humorist who created such incandescently funny scenes of madness in his movies as the chicken hallucinations of famished Big Jim in The Gold Rush. The creator of screen situations involving a persona who worshipped women, even though they made him suffer, versus an off-camera Svengali who was capable of treating them with a sickening contempt. The young man on the make who got rich by playing a bizarrely dressed tramp. The multimillionaire tyrant who spouted the peace messages of the communist line. The Casanova who became a devoted husband and sternly Victorian paterfamilias. The loyal studio boss who kept the same employees with him decade after decade and then left the names of most of them out of his autobiography. The self-proclaimed Cold War martyr who railed against the Department of Justice for revoking his re-entry permit when he and his young wife and their children left the United States for a visit to Europe in 1952, but who may secretly have been planning all along to quit the country and settle in Switzerland. Here, then, is Charlie Chaplin, who, in the opinion of the actress Louise Brooks, was the most bafflingly complex man who ever lived. Chapter 1. A Woman of Sorrows. 1. all eyes were on him. The S&A Company, housed in a Chicago building that is now an officially designated landmark, was a so-called film factory in which inexorable production schedules kept everyone on the run. One morning in January 1915, however, the prevailing work pattern gave way to spectator sport, as virtually the entire staff, including the company's best-known leading man, Francis X. Bushman, and probably its chief scenario writer, Llewellyn Parsons, gathered around the set where Charlie Chaplin was about to start filming his first picture for S&A. Self-referentially entitled, His New Job. On quitting California and the Keystone Company in early December, Chaplin had been forced to leave his costumes behind, so upon arriving in Chicago he purchased a wardrobe. Finding old shoes that were grotesquely too big for him briefly proved to be a problem, but otherwise he had no difficulty picking up what he needed. Thus, when the young actor-director-scenario writer walked onto the shooting floor at S&A with a derby perched atop his flying black hair and nervously twirling a cane, he looked altogether familiar to his fellow cast members and to the onlookers as well, who were lined up against the studio wall and clustered on either side of the camera. In the center of the floor, he stopped short, pulled 3 of his fingers out of joint, bent forward into a professional dancer's pose, and executed a clog dance. The performance continued for 5 minutes, to the wonderment of his new colleagues. An observer noted that they didn't know whether he was crazy or doing it just for their amusement. Some laughed. The rest were overcome with amazement. Frank Bushman, however, was not only amazed but annoyed that this upstart who had been acting in movies for only a year had stepped into the limelight at the studio where he was accustomed to being the center of attention. In a testy voice, he inquired about the meaning of Chaplin's antics. "Got to limber up," the little comedian softly replied in a Cockney accent. "A little pep, everybody, a little pep. Come on, boys, shoot your set. I'm ready." His last sentence, startlingly enough, was shouted. One of modern history's most powerful engines of laughter generation and icon creation was revved up and ready to roll. Within the space of the next few months, America went mad about him. Lines formed in front of movie houses whenever his name appeared in lobby ads or on the marquee, even if the picture being shown was a year-old one-reeler. To howls of delight from Broadway audiences, long-stemmed Ziegfeld Follies lovelies sashayed on stage wearing mustaches, derby hats, big shoes, and baggy trousers, singing a song called Those Charlie Chaplin Feet. A comparable showstopper in the review Watch Your Step was Lupino Lane's belted-out, acted-out ode to That Charlie Chaplin Walk. And to these numbers, Tin Pan Alley tunesmiths, banging out the rhythms on overworked pianos, quickly added the Chaplin Waddle, the Charlie Strut, the Chaplin Wiggle, the Charlie Chaplin Glide, and the Charlie Chaplin March Grotesque. As if by magic, Charlie Chaplin lapel pins, hats, socks, ties, squirt rings, Christmas decorations, playing cards, and dolls of various sizes materialized on the counters of department stores and five and dimes. On June 9th, the Cleveland Plain Dealer reported that Cleveland has been getting so full of imitations of Charlie Chaplin that the management of Luna Park recently decided to offer a prize to the best imitator, and out they flocked. The winner was an English-born 12-year-old with a ski-jump nose, a smart-alecky sense of humor, and a budding talent for song and dance who still answered to the name of Leslie T. Hope. With his prize money, the famous comedian of years to come bought his mother a new stove. Toward the end of July, Moving Picture World noted that Chaplin had imitators aplenty among screen actors and vaudeville and cabaret entertainers, and it singled out for special attention the imitation Chaplin movies of Minerva Courtney. Miss Courtney was a clever mimic, the magazine conceded. She could walk like Chaplin, she could skid around corners on one foot with one hand on her hat, and she could give a fair imitation of the little fellow's facial expressions. Her failing, however, was that she had not caught the elusive humor that is a part of Chaplin's personality. The same judgment applied to an indefatigable comedian named Billy West, who carbon-copied Chaplin in dozens of movies, and to the animators who were busily handicrafting Charlie Chaplin cartoons. Recognizable representations of the trademark mannerisms were within their capability, but the ambiguities of Chaplin's spirit eluded them. 2.